I mean, I know that you guys are Chads, and this is the name of the panel. So we'll be respectful of your time and try to shoot for a very efficient and effective session today. And yeah, regardless of kind of who joins, we will have the recording and happily distribute it after. But yeah, I'd like to just have a conversation about, or Rob and I would like to have a conversation about pushing forward account abstraction as a means to grow the space, right? Like just overall making it easier, abstracting away complexities for users. I mean, just me personally, like I'm so done with using MetaMask. It's so bad. Like I'm switching to Rabby finally. I feel like an absolute old grandpa for still using it. Like, is anybody else feeling the same way about like the old school, I guess, DeFi UX?
Yeah, I'll definitely jump in there. I mean, I worked in the wallet space for like 4 or 5 years, and I mean, I will say like I am a user of MetaMask, although for good reason, mainly because like I have to do like work on like test networks and things like that. Um, but yeah, MetaMask, I think it's kind of like the general consensus that MetaMask just generally kind of sucks. Um, and it's great to see a lot of like other teams that are building, I guess, other types of solutions, whether it's for desktop, whether it's just like a web application, or even if it's for a mobile application. There's tons and tons of different options for people to choose from. Um, so obviously that's always great to see. Um, can always get into like the nitty gritty details of like the differences between um, how those like wallets are generated between, or I guess like comparing between like how a MetaMask wallet works or between like a smart contract wallet works for like account abstraction. Um, but yeah, I'll just sort of take a pause there and let some of the other speakers jump in and share some of their thoughts as well.
I think MetaMask is still the primary wallet for a lot of users, even though they don't want to use it, just because it's super easy to integrate with new blockchains, and I'm not sure how many blockchains there are right now. So it's just that if you have to use any dApps or most probably participate in a giveaway, right, you would have to use MetaMask. But I think things are changing pretty quickly. Like a lot of users are usually stick to a couple of blockchains. Like if I have to use any dApp, I usually stick to Polygon, which is the cheapest and I would say the most reliable out there. And with Plena Finance partnering up with more and more dApps in the space, right? Like we partnered with close to 150 dApps, and those dApps would be having a similar user experience to Plena Wallet now. So the users can enjoy a similar user experience. And once we go live on multiple dApps, or when multiple dApps they add support for Plena Wallet, I think more and more people would switch to Plena Wallet, or I would say even other account abstraction solutions.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. In Vitalik's talk, he talked about how they basically were trying to do multi-sigs back in the day with proof of work, Ethereum, and then do a kind of abstraction, but there was a lot of problems with the kind of proof of work and miners. And now that we're in that post world, post proof of work world into the proof of stake world, it's possible. Yeah, I mean, guys, we can do this kind of regimented or kind of in a conversational manner. So if you guys have something to add, feel free. I don't just want to poop on MetaMask all day, but I'm curious as to like how. Let's just pose a question: how you guys are viewing the current DeFi user experience for somebody, and then like how are you building with your product to kind of help make it a better, safer, friendlier, more secure experience for more people. And I guess we'll just start with Arjun, and then we can kind of run through it. And just curious to hear your guys' takes on that front.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think the like important answer here is that, and this is a bit of a controversial take, but I really think that the like really main stuff that's actually really useful in this space is really all infrastructure. Like even when you're talking about things that are kind of applications today, right? Things like Uniswap, for example, is an application, but like in the long term, the goal is for Uniswap to be like this infrastructure protocol that a bunch of different types of people are building on top of, and like working within the ecosystem of to like do something. And like it stands to reason that eventually you'll have like Robinhood and all of these other financial applications connecting to Uniswap to do trading. And they'll be connecting to the protocol to do it. And it will make sense for them to connect to the protocol to do it, because it's like, why not just use this existing protocol with liquidity that has a big ecosystem around it? And, you know, at that point, like, you have this like Web2 application that needs to go and connect to Web3 infrastructure. And how do you make that happen? Well, I think the way that that happens is not going to be us like Robinhood going and creating a whole application from scratch, you know, that uses MetaMask and things like that, or uses whatever, like uses their own mobile wallet. It's going to be to have just a bunch of really like best practices in the space that abstract everything. And I think that that's the direction this has to head, is like, we should get to the point where an existing Web2 application can just completely unplug from, you know, using Amazon and other kinds of like legacy Rails for stuff and just switch to Web3. And they should be able to do that in a way where they don't change their user experience at all in any way whatsoever. I mean, other than perhaps to make it simpler, because you no longer have to have like email logins and other kinds of like junk stuff that everybody does that's like completely useless. So that's kind of our mentality, is like, we think that's like, that problem is made up of a bunch of different things. It's like, you know, the account abstraction, it's gas abstraction, it's like RPC abstraction. And for us, the key thing there is chain abstraction. Like, we want to create a world where you as a user never really need to know at all what chain you're on. We want to create like tooling that allows wallets and applications to build that way, where like they can just say, hey, like, you're just using this app. And if that app happens to, like, regardless of where your wallet is connected to, where you're paying gas from, where your funds are, the app should just work. You know, from our perspective, that kind of happens when we get to, you have to make a lot of like incremental changes to like the way that people think about wallets and RPCs and things like that. But that's the end goal that we're trying to head towards.
100%. I love the vision, Arjun, and I think one important piece about chain abstraction, as you alluded to, abstracting away from knowing which chain you're on, to Web2 companies and to Web2 users, that means not even knowing that you're on a blockchain at all, regardless of which specific one you're on. That part is abstracted away as well. You don't even realize that you're interacting with the blockchain on the other end of this seamless Web2 feeling user experience. That
Exactly. Like, users don't care about blockchains. Like, they've never cared about blockchains. The users that care about blockchains are the ones that are investing into a chain's token. Like, that's the only time that you actually care about the blockchain. And most people will not do that. So like, we need to find some way to make it so that like, if you're a user of, you know, you can be a user of like the next Twitter or the next Facebook, and like, you should just be using an app, and you should just be logging into it in, you know, using some sort of like simpler login mechanism. And that's something that hasn't really been solved yet, but some sort of like simpler universal login mechanism. You should be able to log in using that mechanism. You should be able to interact, post, you should be able to send money to people, you should be able to do whatever the hell you want. And like, that should be using Lens in the background, that should be using a bunch of cross-chain stuff in the background, that should be posting all of its data. Like, ideally the entire app should be served from the chain itself. It should be posting its data to IPFS, et cetera. And like, as a user, I mean, today as a user, do you need to care about which database shard, Google's database shard, your YouTube video is stored on? No. And like, it's preposterous to assume that users should care about that.
Yeah, way over the average user's head for even just the internet, of course. Peter, do you have any further thoughts?
Yeah, no, completely agree on these points. Like, the more choices we can bring into the UX, you know, around those, I think it makes sense. I just add a different point, which is, I think we're kind of on a journey to discover like where transactions should be initiated, or specifically where execution should be initiated, and that's kind of where account abstraction becomes interesting for us at Era, building and treasury management. So kind of, I was recently looking at kind of Uniswap X, and I think what's kind of interesting, like what's Uniswap done this year, is if you kind of lay out the matrix, if you lay out the 2x2, and bear with me here as an X management consultant, it will make sense. The 2x2 of like, where you can initiate execution. So off-chain and on-chain is one axis, and then kind of immediate execution and patient execution is another axis. What Uniswap has done this year is they had like 25% of the matrix, like with their AMM, they had, immediate execution initiated on chain, right? And so now they added Uniswap v4, which filled out one more block. And then they added Uniswap X, which filled out two more blocks, right? So Uniswap X filled out the off-chain blocks, right? The RFQ system is the give me the quote now very quickly. The Dutch auction system is the give me the quote in a more patient way and give me a better price. And then Uniswap v4 is sort of the on-chain patient thing because it adds Uniswap, a time-weighted AMM, right? Which is the place where you can say, hey, I have a 1 million order, but I don't need to execute it right now. I'll execute it slowly. So I think account abstraction kind of brings something similar to the fold, right? We're going off this model where it always has to be a transaction to be executed instantly into like there's some sort of signed order, potentially moving into an intent world as well. And so that's what's really interesting. I think we've just been we've been really handicapped specifically as on-chain protocols as well from initiating transactions. And on Era in treasury management, that's kind of something that we're excited about. And why kind of this whole notion of intents is really exciting. So yeah, that's kind of my favorite part about account abstraction is really it just kind of opens up the question of like where are transactions executed, initiated? Is it from an intent? Is it a direct transaction? And yeah, to other points on cross-chain, I think those are also fantastic questions.
Yeah, and it's an interesting kind of proposition, right? Because you've got the angle that Arjun has kind of presented, which is just this abstracting away these complexities, and it almost seems like with what you're getting at, Peter, it's almost like abstracting away it even further by like getting down to the bare bones of what the desired outcome is, right? And I know that we're speaking kind of in the abstract here, and if you're listening, we're trying to kind of put the pieces together for what the future of on-chain economy could look like from the user perspective, but kind of bringing it more into the real. I know, Mark, you guys at Fuji are really focused on cross-chain, lending and borrowing, and kind of also just recently have started working with Connext and Arjun. So I guess talk to us a bit, Mark, if you can, about chain abstraction within your app and kind of practically speaking, what that looks like now and how it helps me as a user to have a better experience with Fuji.
For sure. Yeah. And so one of the things that we do is we try to, I guess we're using the word abstract a lot here, but one of the goals that we try to have is to abstract away a lot of the complexities in terms of like what chain it is that you're interacting with. We don't really want to frankly care what it is. Similar to what Arjun said, like it's just like we don't really care. We want to take a very agnostic approach in terms of like what chains that we support and what chains that you go and interact with. And one of the approaches that I guess like that we're taking, and we actually worked quite closely with the Connext team on this, is essentially how we're able to go and bundle transactions together. So when you're going and like sending a transaction, one of the things that you can do is you can bundle a whole bunch of different types of transactions together through our router contract. And that allows you to do multiple operations in one transaction. And we also build in the ability for transactions to occur on other chains, essentially like on your behalf. So we're going and using, I'm blanking on the term for it. Crud. So basically it allows for a transaction to occur on another chain without you actually having like the gas token for that additional network for that transaction to occur. And we essentially like cover that on your behalf. So that's like a similar concept to account abstraction and how we essentially allow you to do that. Similar to like a sequencer that you use with a smart contract wallet. Where we have essentially just a wallet that can help facilitate some of these transactions for you, where you essentially go and sign a message. So just making that entire user experience much more straightforward and easy for you as a user. And that's kind of the goal for, I mean, that should be the goal for pretty much any application when you're offering that to your customers.
And Sparsh, you guys are doing something very similar. Sorry, Rob, this just came to my mind on Planner, right? You guys have gasless transactions, right? So people can go onto the mobile app, not necessarily need that token, but can still do transactions, if I'm not mistaken.
Exactly. So we're actually doing something similar. And the reason why we built Plena this way was because like I was a part of a couple of projects which touched a market cap of $500 million at that time. And then I also saw Compound like touch a market cap of $1 billion. And the total number of users that Compound had at that time was just 10,000. And they weren't even daily active user or monthly active users. They were just the users who have interacted with Compound once in their lifetime, right? And I was kind of amazed, like what's happening, and I saw that no one is using these dApps, right? Currently, it's the same thing. Like even if the bull run starts tomorrow, I don't think anyone would be using these dApps as of now until more and more dApps start using account abstraction technology because it's so complex for an average user to use that, right? And how we built Plana was like we wanted to provide our users a centralized application like user experience. So let's say we were talking about Uniswap, right? So if a user wants to buy a token on Uniswap, they have to do first approval transaction, then they have to do actually the swap transaction. Those are two transactions. Even this part is quite complex for, I would say, an average user or a new user, right? And how we do that is we actually batch both of those transactions together, and we allow the user to pay the transaction fee in the token that they're using for the swap, just like they do on Binance. And yeah, we're basically focusing on this, like all of the new features that we're launching. We are trying to keep the same UX. We did try to abstract away this part, like we didn't want to tell our users which chain they're using, but that's kind of complex because if we do that, a user might get confused and they might even lose their funds because if you just transfer it to a random address on a blockchain on a different blockchain, right, that user ends up losing their money. So I think we can't abstract that part. Like we can't remove that part that the user can just interact with any dApp on any blockchain without caring about it. But yeah, we can abstract away this gas fee part, and a bunch of different stuff. Like they don't have to do multiple transactions, and everything gets in one single tap.
I love this direction that account abstraction in this space is headed because the gas token piece seems like it unlocks this whole new world of potential applications where the ideal setup in my mind, and I'd love kind of like other elements and configurations here, is a Web2 company that integrates account abstraction. Because yeah, people aren't using the Web3 dApps right now. Like there's 10 users, in Decentraland or whatever the number is. But the Web2 companies have all of the user flow. They have all the user acquisition and the brand recognition. And the Web2 front end is the perfect venue for these users to express their intention. With that intention then being put on chain and accessing the liquidity that already exists in these Web3 protocols. So while I think Web3 applications can integrate account abstraction and probably generate some more users by improving that user experience, as some of the, Petrus, you alluded to Intense, Arjun, you alluded to Web2 companies integrating Web3 protocols. I think, Web3 companies can generate some more users by integrating account abstraction, but I think what really moves the needle is these Web2 companies integrating that account abstraction and then pushing that order flow on chain. I'm curious, like that's kind of how I see it, but I love the kind of the creativity that we have on this panel. So if there's any other visions on how that might work, definitely jump in.
No, I mean, I think that's basically it, right? Like you have, like anytime you have applications, like, so basically a way to think about this is that currently there's like the decentralized backend, which is just a blockchain or eventually many blockchains. And then you have like, kind of infrastructure protocols that are sitting in between that like provide different levels of functionality. And then you have this like centralized front end, and eventually it could be a decentralized front end as well. But you basically have these front ends that are tying into, like at this stage, tying directly into the backend contract infrastructure. I think what needs to exist is this like middle layer, and this is, you know, like this is really an intent layer effectively. This isn't a new concept by any means. It's like people are coalescing around the intent terminology to represent this thing. But the core idea is just you need this middleware layer where where like an application can integrate into that acts as a mechanism to abstract a lot of the complexity of interacting with with a blockchain directly. But then also more generally, like all of this, like the nuances of as a user needing to do things with chains. And so like having to deal with cross-chain, having to deal with gas, et cetera. And so, yeah, I mean, from my perspective, like these two approaches are really one and the same. There is a need for a middleware layer that is extremely valuable and extremely important that like really needs to exist, where you have as decentralized as possible network of off-chain provider or like service providers effectively that are running businesses that are helping application front ends interact with the chain. And I would actually qualify, for example, Fuji as a really great instance of this, where you have, you know, these like on-chain focused protocols, like money market protocols that have their own, that are basically like fully on-chain implementations. And historically, the way that you have interacted with these money market protocols has been through like Aave's own interface or Compound's own interface. But, you know, that's not super useful long-term, because like as a user, you don't really know those brands, or you don't want to know those brands at the end of the day. You know, if you're investing into a money market through Robinhood or through some other financial app like Revolut, you don't care that like this is going into Aave versus something else. What you care about is like, is Revolut giving me XYZ percentage on my savings account denominated in USD? And Fuji is the kind of like abstraction layer that enables that, right? You know, Fuji at this stage is like a user-facing application, but eventually is the thing that would then go integrate into the Robinhoods of the world. And make it so that Robinhood can interact with Aave, Compound, and any other money market that comes up in the future, and always get the best pricing. And like their users can always get routed to the best place without ever having to like know about or think about what's happening under the hood.
Yeah, kind of a related way of looking at this is it also relieves the effort on the protocol side, right? Because before, when we wanted to innovate, and even kind of just beyond the basic kind of chain access things of like, you got to pay gas, you got to get a key and so on, there's kind of other things we want to fiddle around, right? I mean, Starkness had a kind of abstraction for a while. You know, people are experimenting with it in gaming, certainly for signing, but then also for other things. So one example is just more flexible approvals, right? If you're playing a game and you have a wallet where you have, you know, $50, like maybe you don't want to be issuing separate approval transactions. Maybe you just want to prove that money to be spent or a certain budget for a given game. So you kind of want that flexibility. And currently, you know, the protocols have to take some of that burden for those types of features, like maybe they have to support permit to, for example, have more flexible approvals. And there's probably going to be many more categories of this where we're now splitting it up so the protocols don't have to choose what they support. Users choose what wallet they use, and therefore what additional, you know, abilities it basically gives them. So I think it's both the chain access piece, but then also just, it just seems like it facilitates much more modularity around innovation. And so it'll be fun to see, yeah, to your point, you know, all these different types of wallet implementations and which ones end up getting traction. But I think it just simplifies protocols in the long run.
Well, I think the Web2 application should only create solutions, or I would say features that the users want to use. If every application that we know starts building their own solution for account abstraction, that's going to be really confusing for the users. So I think one of the example that I can visit is, let's say if you're ordering food from KFC and Domino's, right? And you want to pay for for both of those orders, right? So you can just use your bank account to make the payment for both of those orders. But let's say if let's just consider these two as different applications, right? Different apps, and they're both implementing account abstraction. So it would be like Domino's has a different account address or different blockchain address, and KFC also has a different account address, and you would have to keep funds on both of those dApps in order to interact with those dApps. So I think it's really necessary that like users use a single, let's say, account abstraction wallet, and then use that wallet to interact with different apps and get a similar user experience.
Yeah. And what does that look like in practice when there's one standard account abstraction tool that protocols and dApps share? Is it like one way to think about this that comes to mind is sign in with Ethereum, right? And put like this sign in with Ethereum option right next to sign in with Twitter or sign in with Apple or sign in with Facebook, and give users the ability to socially log in to this application. And that's potentially problematic because Robinhood may not want to give their users the option to sign in with Ethereum. So I think the intention is great to somehow standardize account abstraction, but when the user base is fragmented across many different brands, yeah, that kind of calls for like, okay, Robinhood, would have its own account. KFC might have its own account. Domino's might have its own account. So how do we standardize account abstraction so that it is universally acceptable across the across these worlds?
Yeah, so I think if users are using self-custodial wallets, right? So, for example, Plena as well. So we can't restrict user to sign into any other application, and that's what we're doing with other dApps as well. So, like we came up with our own account abstraction SDK, and the difference with other account abstraction SDK was that, like we were talking to different apps, and they told us that if they had to let's say integrate any other account abstraction SDK, they had to make changes to their smart contracts, and that was quite I would say a bit more expensive, because if you make slight changes to your smart contracts, you would have to get them audited again, right? And that's why we came up with a solution that the dApps don't have to make any changes to their solution or in their smart contracts or even their front end script. They could just integrate Plena wallet into their application, and they can use the same code that they're using for MetaMask, and just interact with Plena wallet. So the users get the same I would say benefits, like they get full custody of the funds, but they also get a user experience like a centralized exchange. So they're able to interact with, let's say, Uniswap with these, right? They are able to batch all of those transactions, like providing liquidity, which takes up to 7 to 8 transactions in one single tap. And then later on, if they want to interact with QuickSwap, right? So we're not stopping them to interacting with QuickSwap. They can just interact with whichever application they like.
Got it. Yeah, Mark, what's on your mind?
Yeah, so one thing that I really wanted to sort of mention, and maybe we can have like a discussion about it, is the ability for what you can do around signing messages with account abstraction. And I've seen this in a very prominent manner, especially within the StarkNet ecosystem. For those of you who aren't really familiar with StarkNet, they're building. I guess they built one of the first ZK rollups, and I will say it's not an EVM compatible ZK rollup. So they're able to do a little bit additional customization in terms of how things actually operate. And one of the really cool things that you can do with account abstraction wallets specifically is how you can sign messages. So usually when you're going and doing like an on-chain transaction or doing anything on-chain, it requires you to go and sign a message. And one of the really cool things with account abstraction, and I've actually seen this through one of the developers for the project, his name is Terrence, and he's working on a project. I'm blanking on what the name of it is. Cartridge. Yes, you're correct. Cartridge. Terrence is working on a project called Cartridge, and one of the really cool concepts that you can do with how you sign these messages is you only have to sign once. And let's say for like a certain period of time, let's say like an hour or a day or for a week, you don't have to go and sign any other messages for any other on-chain transactions. So if you're building, let's say, like as an example, like a fully on-chain game, you can go and like, let's say there's a character that's moving around on this on-chain board, just as an example. You can go and move that character around on chain without having to go and sign any other messages. So it's really making that user experience significantly better. And if you're trying to build a product that is fully on chain, it allows you to not have to go and require the user to go and sign a transaction every time a specific operation is supposed to occur, which I think is really, really cool. There's also some pretty sweet things that people are able to do with how they're able to go and manage keys. Like you can go and store your keys in a secure enclave on your device, or obviously using like social recovery. There's different manners that you can do for that. So those were a couple things that I just wanted to sort of bring up that we haven't really like touched on very much. And I think Sparsh wants to sort of jump in. So I'll let you take the floor.
No, I just had a question. Like I was checking out Cartridge, and see the whole purpose of signing messages, right? So what happens in blockchain as well? So a user just signs a message and then relays it to the blockchain. Like when you relay it to the blockchain or send it to the blockchain, you pay the transaction fee. And in account abstraction, we just make sure that you are signing messages, but someone else is forwarding it to the blockchain, so that you don't pay for the transaction fee in the native token, right? And from what I understood about Cartridge was that you're able to sign a message for a while, let's say for 1 hour, and then till that 1 hour, you don't have to sign any other message, right? And you can perform any action that you like on blockchain. So in terms of security, let's say if I'm sending you, let's say 100,000 points on in that game, right? And the signature is already there. I sent it to you. The transaction went on blockchain. It's, let's say, public. And if I have to, if I don't want to do that again, right? But that signature and that data is already public and it's sent to the blockchain. So how does someone stop anyone to, let's say, replaying that transaction or doing that transaction again without my approval?
Sure. So, I mean, some of the things that you can do, since these are smart contract wallets, they can be basically customized to any extent that you want. So if you want to require like additional signatures for transactions over a certain amount, like you can go and do that. Obviously, like with a smart contract wallet, with account abstraction, you can enable for like multi-sig capabilities. So for example, like if you want to go and say for a transaction over X amount, you might need to have multiple signatures to occur for that to happen. And like I'll give like an example. I mean, they were actually like my old company's biggest competitor, but I absolutely love what they're doing. So I'll give them a little bit of a shout out. Argent, they built like the first smart contract wallet. They're doing some really cool work with how you can essentially manage a product as just like an end user, or you can have like a multi-sig capabilities for a quote unquote hot wallet. And you can customize, like if you say, okay, if the transaction is over like $1,000, I need to go and have multiple signatures for that to occur. Or you can limit how much can go out of your wallet on a given day or over a given period of time. So there's a lot of customization that you can have within the wallet itself.
Did you used to work for Bravos, Mark?
No. So I was one of the founders of Numio. We built the first ZK rollup mobile wallet.
Yeah, I think another thing to touch on the concept of streamlining and I guess what's the word? It's not like normalization, but it's like having a set procedure, a set framework for everybody to interact with, which utilizes account abstraction. I know Peter is quite bullish on a specific token standard, and I know Arjun is also bullish on a different token standard. So I guess we can get a little bit technical here and kind of
discuss how different types of token standards that are not yet being utilized as much as they could be can also play a part in like the streamlining of the UX and the UI, and how that works. So yeah.
I mean, I think one of the key challenges here, so like, there's a lot of standards out there. One of the key challenges is that the space has grown so much that like not all of these standards apply to everybody, and so it's like there's like a bit of a targeting issue right now where like everybody builds like ERCs, which are broader Ethereum standards, but then some of those standards are like for NFT marketplaces. Some of those standards are for games. Some of those standards are for DeFi. Some of those standards are for cross-chain stuff. And one thing that I've kind of seen consistently is that like things in the ERC stuff kind of get lost in the noise because it is a bit more of a like process to then go and market the standard, and like the adoption of the standard only comes very, very like late after a bunch of other stuff has already happened, and like the approval of the standard comes very late after the adoption of the standard has already happened. I would say like generally what I've seen be more effective is for if you're able to drive like ecosystem specific standards first and focus those around the ecosystem before then, or like, you can share them more broadly through the ERC process immediately, but having the focus kind of be around like, okay, this is a very specific signing standard or set of modules for abstracting the complexity of games. That seems to go a lot better than saying here is a very like high level approach that is applicable to everything, because then people just kind of get lost without having like a specific use case to tie it to.
I would say I'm kind of bullish on ERC6551. It's kind of like a token standard. So what it lets you do is, let's say if you have a NFT, right, and you have a smart contract, so you can actually use that NFT to control that account. So let's say if you, for example, you have a Plena wallet, right? You have a smart contract account on Plena, and whoever owns a particular NFT would control that particular account, right? So what we can do with that is like there's I would say endless use cases. So let's say if you want to use that in a game, right? I have a gaming account and I'm at level 65. So before the standard, like, or how currently it works is, let's say if I want to purchase or sell my account to someone who's paying me, let's say $10,000 for that account, right? I can't. I would have to actually share my email address and all my personal details in order to transfer my ownership or my account ownership to that particular person. But with ERC6551, what you can do is we can just simply transfer that particular NFT, and the user would get the complete access to that account without me sharing my personal information.
Yeah, very cool to think about updating the NFT metadata in that context, and then how that might change the interactions that you could have with the wallet. Yeah, have you thought about this?
So that's the best part. So we don't have to worry about the metadata. Like we are also implementing this in Lena. So we just check like the smart contract actually checks the NFT ID. So since the NFT ID is unique for I would say ERC721 tokens, so how that works is, let's say if I have a NFT which like, and the NFT ID is one, right? So I would have a smart contract which is being controlled by that particular NFT ID, and no one else would be controlling that token. Oh, sorry, that smart contract. Only that particular NFT could control that. So we don't have to change anything related to metadata. It's just that I can simply transfer it to someone else, and that person can have, I would say, complete custody of that new smart contract. And it could be anything. Like as I told you, like it could be a gaming account. It could be something like wallet as well, right? Maybe you can use a wallet and maybe use that as a collateral and use that in a bunch of different applications.
Yeah, and this is actually a fun, it's a fun illustration to Arjun's point that, we are running into a world where different standards are solving for slightly different and overlapping problems, and which ends up with more complexity at the macro level. And kind of, specifically, when we came up with a kind of abstraction, it seemed really neat. But now that we're talking about intents, like in some ways we're seeing a kind of abstraction as a little bit potentially insufficient. Like we maybe want more flexibility in these intent systems to initiate transactions. And then with ERC 6551, kind of as they went through the design space, they realized that there was not a single account abstraction implementation that could be used, right? So basically, each NFT actually points to multiple, like, and potentially basically a very large number of potential wallet implementations, right? So for every single account implementation, your NFT has a predetermined address where it would have an account according to that implementation. So which then creates complexity, right, on the side of the kind of DeFi aggregators and people showing off NFT collections, because now they have to figure out, out of like all possible account abstraction implementations out there, like which ones are you using and like what assets do you have in there, and so on. And so we're sort of creating this weird nightmare of like pricing NFTs and so on. But it's yeah. So I think it's just a consequence of doing this in a decentralized way, and I think each standard is solving a slightly different problem, which will be fun to flesh these out over time.
I had a sneaking suspicion that intents would somehow come into this conversation, because it's been the talk of the town, and I think there is a lot of overlap in a similar way that there's a lot of overlap in the standards right now. There's a lot of overlap in the token standards. There's a lot of overlap on the concepts of account abstraction and intents. I have a take, kind of how account abstraction could power intents. I think that's only scratching the surface. So I am quite curious on Petrus and Arjun. How do you guys reconcile intents and account abstraction? How do you guys see those working together? Do they overlap? Are they separate? How do you see them, one benefiting the other and them integrating?
So just to clarify, like the two things are basically, intents is basically a framework where you have users specify a more high level concept of like what they want to do in an application, and then the application broadcasts it. And then you have basically a network of actors that are like you basically have an open ecosystem of actors that then figure out how to make that happen for the user. And the way that works, for example, the way that works in a non-custodial way is like if you want to do a trade of something, then the intent solver fronts their own capital for the trade, and then they get paid back later once they prove that they have solved the intent correctly by the user. And so there's this kind of like market making / like fronting liquidity portion where someone off chain is basically like taking on the risk of doing the thing, and in the background you have once they do the thing successfully, then they get repaid. And then account abstraction is removing.
Just to clarify, that's known as the OFA model, right? The order flow auction model.
I mean, yeah, it's just that's like a new term that refers specifically to trading, but this core concept has existed basically since the creation of atomic swaps, which is an atomic swap from like old Bitcoin days. I think the first atomic swap was proposed in like 2011 using HTLCs, and like since that, or the first kind of in production atomic swap construction was in 2011, I believe. I'm not 100% sure. Since then, I mean, that is the first kind of quintessential example of an intent where you want to swap between two chains or swap between two assets. So how do you do that? You put your asset, in this case, it was typically Bitcoin on chain, into an HTLC contract and say, like, I want someone to I will reveal the secret to unlock this Bitcoin if somebody is willing to give me Litecoin on Litecoin's chain. And so someone then creates a corresponding HTLC contract on Litecoin's chain with the same like secret preimage and or the same kind of like hashed secret. And then you then reveal your preimage, and then that they can like unlock your BTC, and you can go and unlock their Litecoin. So this core concept, it's like being applied to order flow auctions now, but the high level of this is, and the more generalized concept behind it is just an off-chain network of people that are going to be doing something for you on your behalf, taking some action on your behalf. Now account abstraction as a concept, again, just at the highest level, is the idea that you have, that as a user, you are not having to be the one that submits transactions to chain yourself. Instead, you are just signing messages or doing some other kind of like pre-programmed action. And then you have a network of off-chain actors that are doing the actual on-chain transactions for you. You are basically never actually interacting with an account directly. You are interacting with a smart contract wallet or something like that, where you're signing things and other people are able to interact with your account for you. That's these two things are like, so that's kind of high levels of how those two, like what those two things are. Once you think about them in those terms, it starts to make a lot of sense why they're actually quite related. So in the first case, you have an off-chain network of actors that are doing something on-chain for you. And that is like a specific on-chain activity that they're solving for. And in the second case, you have an off-chain network of actors that are just transacting for you on your behalf, removing the need for you to interact with your account in the first place. Like in 2019, Connext actually built a system, a state channel system for micropayments. And we employed both of these concepts. We had a mechanism where users signed once. There was a key that was generated, an ephemeral key in the browser. We ideally would have been able to have this happen using smart contract wallets, but at the time there just wasn't enough adoption for it. So what we would do is we would effectively move tokens into what was a 2 out of 2 multisig, where you only needed one signer, and then the other signer would be an in-browser signer that was submitting signatures in browser for when users were like paying for things. And so, the example use case here was like if you were interacting with, an application that was using the Graphs network, you in the background, every single time you made an HTTP request to go and get some data, it would do a micropayment from your browser for very, very tiny fractions of a cent. And the way that those micropayments were settled was as an intent. So every time you're signing one of these things, right, you're signaling an intent to the counterparty saying, okay, I am intending to, like, the total amount that I'm paying you has gone up from, 0.05 cents to 0.06 cents. And I'm intending to settle these to chain at some point in the future. And then at any point in the future, the counterparty can actually take that intent, take your signature on that intent, and then actually put it on chain. I think like these two concepts, it's like been very clear for a long time. And I think for a lot of other kinds of constructions, when people will start like retroactively going back and analyzing the things that have existed in the space, we'll find that actually people have already been building account abstraction and intents in a way that have been super, super like combined for quite a while. It's just that we didn't really have like the language to communicate about it. And we also didn't have the standards around it to do this in a way that was like ubiquitous across the space. And because of that, there was always just like a fragmented, shitty experience. So yeah, from my perspective, I actually think that these things aren't separable. Like I think the ultimate outcome is that if you head towards account abstraction, we will end up with intents. And if you head towards intents, we will end up with account abstraction. And the main reason is that in both cases, you have a network of off-chain actors that have privileged access to information about what the user wants. And they have a very strong incentive to like just do that themselves on behalf of the user and like earn some fees for it.
That is an interesting prehistory to both the account abstraction and the intents landscape. Vitalik didn't go as far back as 2011 in his ECC presentation. Is there any other thoughts as far as this is an open forum here? So if there are any other thoughts, feel free to jump in and compliment Arjun's description there of how the concept of intents and how the concept of account abstraction are almost inherently related, because they both abstract away this idea of submitting transactions directly to the chain, and it kind of introduces a few more layers to the tech stack. There's now modules that allow you to just express your intention through signing a message. You don't have to interact with the wallet or the chain at all. You might not even, in a futuristic world, you might never even have to have money on chain. if you can express an intent to do something off chain, and that intent could be filled by a market maker on chain, then there's some really potentially cool things that you could do off chain through market makers and takers providing liquidity and making transactions on chain. So I think we're like starting to open up this whole new off-chain world with account abstraction and intents, because it opens up opportunities to do things off-chain that you wouldn't realize were available unless you've been doing them on-chain. But now we can do them off-chain with account abstraction and intents, and that's really cool. And I think Web2 companies are going to love that. I think they're going to love that their users aren't impacted by any of the technical components, but their capital efficiency and their bottom line, they can provide more to their clients by interacting with the chain. And specifically interacting with the liquidity that's on chain. And I think by interacting with that liquidity and sharing it with users, will provide much more capital efficient solutions for those Web2 companies. They end up making more. These are for-profit companies, and their users are happy, right? Because they get better quotes, better prices by combining liquidity that lives in multiple places on chain and off chain together. You get deeper liquidity pools and better prices, and the user experience is as seamless and smooth as your favorite Web2 applications. Mark, I'm curious kind of how this ties into Fuji, because you guys are doing some very cool DeFi things with account abstraction. I'm curious if you've thought about intents, how you guys see that playing out, and how you may interact with liquidity on chain, and ultimately provide a better user experience.
Sure. So I wouldn't say that it's us directly leveraging account abstraction. I would say it's, I guess, how we use different, I guess, aspects of it. I mean, I'm kind of just like a nerd for it, so like I take it very intensely, generally from like the wallet perspective, but that's just like because of my past experience. But in terms of us, like, how we're looking at that is improving user experiences by like bundling transactions, using different types of like paymasters and sequencers for certain chains that we're interacting with. I know we're leveraging Open Zeppelin for some of those capabilities, which is pretty cool. So we're using, I guess, aspects of account abstraction, but not like in the full-fledged manner. But doing so is still it still allows us to be able to like improve that user experience. So like as an example, doing like a 2 or 3 chain transaction can require upwards of like 10 or even 11 individual transactions. And we're able to bundle all of those transactions together essentially into one click. And that type of experience is similar to the type of concept that you're able to do with account abstraction, specifically with bundling transactions. So that type of aspect is something that we are really looking on focusing on, especially since we are doing a lot of operations cross-chain. So that's one of the things that we're looking at, and we actually have already introduced that into the product itself.
By the way, Mark, for Fuji, this is actually something that I meant to like chat with you guys about at some point, but I guess I'll bring it up now. So like one of the directions that Connext wants to go is like we already have a network for like basically doing, we have like an off-chain network of actors where that will immediately front their own liquidity or immediately execute a transaction on the destination chain if they have the capacity to do so. And you can specify outside of the protocol any arbitrary logic that then needs to get executed, which is really like an intent, right? It's like fundamentally like for example, the protocol, like the logic that you want to specify, if you're LeFi, for example, the logic that you specify is on the target chain, like swap on 1 inch. And at that point, that is what lets LeFi behave effectively, like what Uniswap X will look like in the future using Connext, where when they route through Connext, our off-chain routers are just like executing this transaction on the target chain. They're providing the bridge token, and then at the destination chain, there's like a swap that happens right at the end before the user's being delivered their tokens, and perhaps something else happens. What we think is really interesting is moving towards a model where like you can have this stuff be protocolized so that it moves away from like a dumb, dumb router or dumb intent solver towards smart routers and smart intent solvers. And in that model, like you move that generalizability outside of, away from like outside of the core protocol, but into inside of the protocol where like, projects like DeFi or projects like Fuji could define some logic for a solver to execute across chains. And so in this model, we move away from a situation like I remember we talked a ton about cross-chain debt migration as like a very, very quintessential use case for cross-chain lending and for improving the cross-chain lending experience. And one of the big challenges that we ran into when chatting about this with Fuji and a bunch of other people was like, okay, well, you need to have some like liquidity providers, and those liquidity providers at this stage within the way that Connext works currently, those liquidity providers can't be our existing liquidity providers. They need to be like an entirely separate set. But if you move that into the protocol, then that actually allows, Andy, as you mentioned, like that allows Fuji to head towards a world where like they are then building like a intent centric mechanism on top of Connext that allows them to specify logic for any arbitrary infrastructure provider to fulfill this cross-chain intent to migrate some debt or to, open or close a position on another chain, and does that in a way where you're leveraging like the existing liquidity of the system rather than having to go bootstrap external liquidity, which I think is super cool. And it feels to me like there's a really, really interesting, completely unexplored opportunity there right now around for like the cross-chain money market segment.
That was super cool. I'm glad we also have one of the co-founders of Fuji sort of listening in. So we've got multiple ears and eyes, I guess, listening in terms of what we can potentially do with that.
Sorry for hijacking. There's somebody else that had wanted to jump in.
I love it. I'm glad that we're bringing these up, fresh ideas, like right up from the cuff. I think that's what this is all about. And I've thought a little bit about this. Like one way I think what you're describing, one way it could work is almost like an intent mempool where there's like this pool of intents. And then these market makers, these fulfillers, basically like liquidity providers, they fill those orders in this intent mempool. And I'm not technically savvy enough, and I haven't thought about this enough to understand like the nuance between a dumb relayer and a smart relayer, and kind of like who fills that order. But Arjun, there was one point you mentioned about who provides that liquidity, and you mentioned how like Fuji could create almost like you were hitting on how Fuji could construct this intent-centric protocol and then outsource its liquidity providers so that it wouldn't have to bootstrap its own liquidity. Could you maybe unpack that a little bit more on how now there's like a divide and conquer approach to liquidity and to order flow or intent flow?
Yeah. So basically, like, and maybe jumping specifically into the use case will help here a little bit, because I think it's a really abstract concept at this stage for a lot of people in the space, and it will take a little while for there to be enough collective knowledge about how we should think about this aside from just some specific use cases. So of course, one of the specific use cases that has become really, talked about now is things like CowSwap, 1inch Fusion, and Uniswap X, which is basically cross-chain trading, or maybe not even cross-chain, but just trading using intents. And so you, as a user, you just say like, I want to get XYZ token or on whatever chain if that's involved. And then like someone just goes and gives that, like a market maker just goes and gives that to you. But then the kind of next question that would come up there is, well, aside from just, I have a token on one chain, or I have one token, I want to get to another token, what other kinds of things can you do using this model? And that's something that I think has just not really been talked about a ton yet. And it's something that we've been exploring a lot. So some really quintessential examples that we think are very, very interesting are like, doing, for example, there's a lot of use cases around NFTs. There's a lot of use cases around gaming that have been things that have been explored for a while, where it's like, you want to have some off-chain framework to do a bunch of game actions and then post them all as a bundle to the chain. Now there's like that is all basically intent-based mechanisms. But one that I think is much more salient that I think users, especially in today's multi-chain world, have had to like deal with is what happens if you have if you have an open position, like a lending position on Aave on Polygon. So say you've like, you've lent 10 ETH and you've borrowed, I don't know, very, very safe loan. You've borrowed like $1,000, 1,000 USDC. Now, what happens if you've gone and you've used that USDC to go deploy it into a bunch of other places? So you don't really have that 1,000 USDC anymore. What happens if now you realize, okay, actually the Arbitrum Aave farm or the Arbitrum compound pools actually give me significantly higher rates? How do you migrate? And this is actually a really big open problem at the moment, because the way that you migrate is by unwinding the position on Aave, or unwinding the Aave position on Polygon, and then taking liquidity from that position and then creating a new position on Arbitrum. But in order to unwind that position in the first place, you need to repay the 1,000 USDC loan that you took out. And where do you get the capital for that? So what you would need in that case is what is effectively like a cross-chain flash loan, right? You need somebody to lend you capital, or a multi-block flash loan. You need someone to lend you capital, 1,000 USDC, so you can pay back the 1,000 USDC and get your 10 ETH back on Polygon. You then bridge your 10 ETH to Arbitrum. You use that 10 ETH to build a new position on Arbitrum, and then you borrow 1,000 USDC against that new position. You bridge that 1,000 USDC back, and then you pay it back to the person that actually did the cross-chain flash loan, right? That basically lent you the money for that multi-block loan. But of course, right now, there is no protocol that can do this, right? There's no way on-chain to have a multi-block loan in that way without ending up in, like Iron Bank territory, where there's just all sorts of risks that you face from any person that integrates your project. The solution to this, there's one solution to this, which is like Fuji somehow finds a way to bootstrap a ton of capital, and they do this themselves. They take the risk of like the transactions failing and things like that. They figure out risk parameters that they think make sense, a safe yield that they can give on this, and things like that. And they bootstrap this entire ecosystem around their own liquidity in order to make this relatively simple use case work. The other option is that there are actually a lot of market makers and other like smart liquidity providers that are probably completely comfortable with fronting 1,000 USDC worth of capital for you to unwind your position on one chain, and then waiting for a little bit of time, or either receiving the 1,000 USDC on another chain or waiting a period of time for it to come back to the source chain. And that's the specific use case that we're solving here. So what we're saying here is, instead of this out of band action where you have like this, you have this unwind step and then a bridge step and then like a and then like a new like position creation step and then another bridge step, you instead have a new system where a user says, I want to migrate my funds or my position to this other chain. And they just specify that into Connext. Connext, broadcasts within our network to a set of service providers to say, hey, who can actually just go and open a position on the target chain themselves? And like Fuji can write the logic for a solver in Connext to like learn how to go and open a position. So all the solver has to do is just like front their own liquidity to do it. And then the solver goes and opens the position, and using Connext's existing mechanisms, the solver gets repaid back the 1,000 USDC or the 10 ETH that they would have used to create the position in the first place. So you kind of like change the control flow of who is actually responsible for providing liquidity. You change the control flow of like where does this, like how does this transaction actually flow? You actually create the position on the target chain immediately rather than having to like first unwind the source position. And that massively improves the experience. It massively reduces risk, and it means that Fuji as an org they've just specified this mechanism in our protocol for like to allow for our solvers to do it. They don't need to go and bootstrap that liquidity themselves. The solvers can just have their own capital that they're using for a bunch of different strategies, including Fuji and a bunch of other things as well.
I love seeing projects like integrate in real time on spaces, and that's just one of the use cases.
Oh yeah, you can do this for literally anything. Well, okay, you can do this for any action where the target contract on the destination chain does not have permissioned access. So you can do it, for example, for a Uniswap swap. You can do it for an NFT mint. You can do it for certain kinds of NFT bridging with like certain trust assumptions. You can do it for things like that. You cannot do it for example, a DAO upgrade because you can't pay some third party to somehow have the permissions to upgrade your DAO.
Got it. Yeah, permissioned systems make this order flow and this capital efficiency much more difficult because you have to have the permission to place that order.
Yep.
One of the realms in which we've kind of thought about this is in the finance world, but also specifically the sports finance world. There's a lot of sports gambling and sports order books that resemble a lot of finance. And there's someone in the audience here, Kevin, who he had his hand up a little bit earlier, who's working on AthleteX, a multi-chain liquidity protocol for SportsFi. Okay, I think we'll add math here, Kevin, and I think he has some questions here. And I know we're running a little bit over on time. If anyone has a hard stop or you have some closing thoughts, feel free. And then if anyone can keep going, I think this is great, and I'd love to stick around.
I have a hard stop, so I just wanted to say thank you so much for hosting this. This was an awesome conversation. We actually haven't talked about this like intense stuff before. It's been something that we've been thinking about now for a very, very long time, many years, but we haven't talked too publicly about it. So this is a really awesome opportunity to have a really great discussion about it. So thank you for putting it together, and thanks for everybody else for listening.
Our pleasure. Thanks for coming on.
Cool. Talk to you soon.
Cheers. Yeah, for anyone else, I think we'll keep it going for a little bit while longer. If there are any other questions from the audience, feel free to raise your hand, and we'll get you up on stage. Kevin, floor is yours.
Hey everyone, I think I missed a bit of the intro, but yeah, I'm Kevin working on AthleteX. The core pitch of it is this, right? Like, imagine every time Mookie Betts hits a home run, you receive cash in your wallet. Every time LeBron James scores a three-pointer, you're able to profit off of his statistical performance. And that's really our core mission, is to really like bring to life this like NASDAQ like experience, really tokenizing an athlete's performance and allowing like free speculation. So short breakdown, Kevin working on AthleteX. The core pitch of it is, imagine every time Mookie Betts hits a home run, you can receive cash in your wallet, or every time, for example, LeBron James scores a three-pointer, you can profit off of his statistical performance. And yeah, I definitely had some questions about account abstraction and liquidity, cross-chain liquidity, that I think the last speaker brought up. To start with, like for account abstraction, like I've heard different descriptions of what it is, but I haven't actually gotten to really understand. Does that mean something like OKX is doing, where you just put in your wallet and it's a keyless wallet tied to your email address, or is it something more akin to signing your private keys on chain or something like that? Could someone inform me?
I don't know the wallet that you were referring to. I don't know whether that's like an EOA wallet or whether like how that wallet like actually operates. But to sort of take it down to its most simple form, there's two different types of accounts on, I guess, like Ethereum and other types of blockchains. There's an EOA, which is an externally owned account. And then there are contract accounts. A contract account is similar to like what, I guess, like account abstraction enables. EOAs are something that basically just represents like how much ETH is in an account. And that is something that relates to just having like a public and a private key. And that's essentially like how you prove ownership, by like signing your public key with your private key. And with account abstraction, it's literally a smart contract that is deployed that can be customized based off of your preferences, which can allow for whitelisting of addresses, more advanced features with regards to signing and how you sign transactions. It allows for multi-sig capabilities. It allows for a whole bunch of different types of customizations that aren't technically possible using an EOA, or an EOA meaning an externally owned address. So just to sort of put it plainly, if you're using a wallet like MetaMask, that is an EOA. That is not that is technically not an account abstraction wallet. Other products that you use could potentially be using or leveraging aspects of account abstraction from like the wallet perspective. But in essence, there are just contract accounts and there are like EOAs in the world of blockchains. And that's kind of like the basic difference between them. One can just be generated with almost an unlimited number of accounts, which is an EOA, or you can have a smart contract wallet where you literally have to go deploy a smart contract to have that type of functionality. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah, that definitely clears things up then, and it hones my like follow-up question. It sounds like EOAs are a bit more centralized, but maybe a bit like simpler on the end user because it abstracts away like a lot of complexity and like problems like that. And you know what I was saying when I was muted was like, you know, like our core mission is to deliver like a NASDAQ like experience for athlete performance tokens, and you know, like we essentially want to get to a point where we're this like bringing things like perpetual markets and other types of derivative markets to the athlete performance market. We not only know that's possible and achievable, like we've done it and we've seen it work, but one of the core problems we've run into is liquidity for a lot of these token pairs. And the question that I had earlier was like, how do I word this? Like I understand how like importing other people's liquidity is beneficial to a protocol, right? I think a previous speaker mentioned how you could use intents to access liquidity on other protocols or something like that. But the problem we faced was that we were creating these like exotic pairs that we could capitalize in our native token, but we like, for example, like synthetics infrastructure and liquidity to capitalize our athlete performance markets. I don't know what the answer is, and I was hoping to really like explore that idea with this panel. Any ideas, any thoughts?
So I do just want to clarify one thing that you had mentioned at the beginning with regards to like EOAs and contract accounts. It's not that one is technically better than the other or one is worse. They can both be used. Obviously, both people can use like both kinds of wallets. They each have their own pros and cons. Like a contract wallet can be more secure. An EOA is generally regarded more as just like a regular hot wallet, similar to like MetaMask, but they're not necessarily as quote unquote secure. But with regards to like what you mentioned, I guess with your specific liquidity pairs, I don't necessarily know offhand. I don't know too much about the project, so like it's tough to be able to give like a specific answer in terms of like how to go about that. I also wanted to mention I have to hop off, but I did want to thank the roll-up team and the other speakers for participating in this, and just wanted to thank all the listeners, and yeah, just wanted to say thank you, and also appreciate the questions, Kevin. So thank you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Mark, for coming on. I think this has been a blast, and it's been very helpful to understand account abstraction as well as intents and how those two are interrelated. Are there any other questions from the audience? If there are, feel free to raise your hand or request to speak, and we'll bring you up. Cheers, Mark. Thanks for coming on. While we do kind of put out a call for questions, we do have Petrus and Sparsh still on the panel here, so definitely keen to hear their thoughts on kind of the questions that have been asked, and generally how you feeling?
Yeah, no, this is pretty exciting. I'm glad we got as far as intense and way beyond, actually. So it's pretty cool to map out the landscape here, and I think it'll be interesting to see from which side it's going to develop more. I mean, from just a couple of comments to add on this, I think from my side is it just boils down to, you know, who's gonna play this, like, you know, filler relayer strategist role. I think and specifically for what use case, and kind of the thing I'm interested in is like seeing how broad or narrow the intents pools are going to be, and using your terminology, where, you know, are we going to have one intense pool for every given game, but then one big intense pool for all of DeFi, or are we going to have really, really narrow intense pools across DeFi that maybe are going to compose in some way? So I think there's a whole other part there that we can dig in, and then the other notion is just around, you know, I think account abstraction allows accounts to become assets, and I just wanted to note that, you know, in the context of ERC 6551, you know, we've talked about what it allows, what it gives users in terms of user experience, but I think also, like, something I'm really excited about is that, you know, because we can now trade those accounts, like just this whole notion of the way we're going to maintain accounts, right, in terms of what we put in them and so on, may change, and the way, you know, DAOs and treasuries maintain accounts may change, because they may be aware that, you know, this account may be acquired in an M&A style activity in the future, or, you know, we may start to be able to trade popes as tradable assets, right? So I think there's interesting implications there as well. So yeah, I'm super excited to see this play out, and definitely something that we need to keep talking about to figure out.
Love it. The M&A, you know, merger and acquisition of DAOs, that's a whole nother world. I saw there was an acquisition recently, which was kind of the first one that I had seen take place on chain. And it wasn't totally on chain, right? Because, you know, we're still adopting those token standards. There's a protocol called DHedge. They do a lot of community investing. Anyone can do a strategy. Other people can subscribe to that strategy, and they place liquidity. A community leader manages the strategy and allocates that liquidity, and it's all non-custodial. That protocol is DHedge, and they recently acquired a protocol called mStable, which had been a synthetic asset protocol that was around for a couple of years. And it was interesting to see that acquisition process happen, because a lot of it took place on public governance forums. There was discussion between key leaders of the DAOs, both on the acquiring side and the side that was acquired. But it's still it happened off chain, right? You know, it happened in the public eye on these governance forums, but those governance forums live off chain. And it would be very cool to see this happen in a totally like autonomous and decentralized way. If somehow there was a way to reflect the outcome of those governance discussions on chain through some sort of like optimistic snapshot proposal that executes a transaction to send a DAO's NFT account to another DAO. All of a sudden, like boom, transaction happens, DAO is acquired, and then that transaction occurs on chain autonomously for everyone to see, and everyone who is in the DAO is a part of. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think that is a really interesting direction that the industry is heading with these token standards. And the other one that you mentioned about intent mempools, I think is another conversation to have for sure. We could talk at length about that, and kind of like how broad those pools are. I think just to touch on it a little bit, and we won't go all the way down the rabbit hole, is we see these intent pools with some of the optimistic bridges that are out there. Like I know Across has a network of relayers, but it's not a very complex mempool. The only intents in this mempool are, I have USDC on this chain, I want USDC on that chain. And it's only a matter of, okay, I have this asset and I want the same asset on another chain. That is the intent. We haven't even seen the token part as configurable. So, I have USDC on Arbitrum. I want DAI on mainnet. No, the optimistic relayers right now are only interacting with intents that are one piece, only the chain piece. They haven't adopted the token piece, or several of the other pieces that are available, like what kind of smart contract interactions happen. And Arjun pointed to this. He had a it was almost like some other fancy stuff that would happen before the intender is delivered their tokens, or that order is filled. So I that's just to scratch the surface on a couple of the things that Petrus mentioned. And I'm really glad that you brought them up. Thank you for joining the panel. This has been great. It's helped my knowledge. I hope everyone who's listening, it's helped you build DeFi knowledge as well. Sparsh, I want to kick it over to you, because we've got Plena Wallet as a co-host here, and you guys are doing great account abstraction things as well. Do you have any parting thoughts or any notes on the topics that we've touched on in the last few comments?
Yeah, like first of all, it was great to be one of the speakers. It was really amazing discussing account abstraction with you guys, and also Arjun talking about intents. But it's just that, like you were also talking about the things that we could do with mempools, intent mempools, but a lot of people aren't building that, and I think the main reason for that is the infrastructure. We really need a really advanced infrastructure for that, and I have seen a lot of projects being not even able to handle the bundlers for account abstraction. So it's just really important what technology we use and where we use it. Like in case of Plena as well, we use account abstraction, but in a way that we don't need this advanced infrastructure that Vitalik explained in his white paper, right? Because like if I compare it with one other wallet which is using account abstraction, their transactions are 10 times more expensive than ours. They actually take 10 times more gas. So it's really important to actually, I would say, use a simple approach. And because we're not using a centralized infrastructure, right? And the thing is, like, if we complicate too many things, we are actually increasing the gas prices as well. And we're still far away from, I would say, reaching or using a blockchain which is super cheap and super fast, right? So I think once we are able to get that, like, I think something like we haven't reached something like Solana, right? So there aren't any EVM compatible chains which are as fast as Solana. And the gas cost is actually crazy on Ethereum and other chains as well. Even if you're doing some transaction on Binance Smart Chain, you end up paying $4-5 sometimes if the transaction is too complex. And like the example that Arjun mentioned, right? There were so many steps, including in that particular transaction, that user would end up paying $4-5. And if the amount is low, I don't think anyone would be using those things or doing those transactions over and over. So yeah, I think it's really important to simplify things and keep it simple. And yeah, I think so about Plena, like guys, you can definitely check out our application. We have started our referendum program as well, and you guys can make up to $1 million in Plena token as well. And guys, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming on. It was a blast. I hope everyone got a kick out of today's space. We do these spaces regularly. We're trying to host these once a week, normally Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. If you guys do have recommendations for what you want to hear on the next space, maybe it'll be intense, right? We talked a lot about intense today. Maybe it'll be liquidity, more multi-chain liquidity solutions. So let us know what you guys want to hear about. If you enjoyed this space, please think about liking or retweeting and dropping a comment about what you guys enjoyed the most. Like I said, we're going to be doing these regularly, so make sure you follow the roll-up, as well as all the speakers that we had on stage. We had Plena Wallet. They're still up here. We had Math from AthleteX, and we also had Arjun from Connext. We had Petrus from Yagi on Starknet. We had Mark from Fuji Finance, and we had Parash from Plena. So an absolutely Chad panel for you guys today. Thank you all for listening. We're going to do this again next week and many, many weeks afterwards. Keep following, keep building. We love you guys. Talk soon. GM, GN, good night.